Hi everyone, it's Natalie here. So, welcome to my series on the Mariel Tarot. So we've been examining the overall structure of the Mariel Tarot and what it means and how it functions and why it's so weird and so different from every other deck out there, and yet has so many things in common with all of the three sort of principal tarot deck slash systems that, from which all other decks are generally derived in some form. So, we can find a lot of similarities with the Marseille, with the Rider-Waite-Smith or the Smith-Waite, and with the Thoth, because Marie White is using all of them here. So that said, last time we looked a little bit more closely, well, we looked very closely and in great depth at the Hierophants from both decks, which I think is very necessary if we're going to talk about the fives, right? She is very actively drawing from the French esoteric system, which always ultimately ties the minors back to the majors. As a way of understanding the minors, especially in pip form. So there's a few things I wanted to say continuing into this video about the fives that I think are important. So when we go back to, this is my first edition guidebook, but when we go back to what she says about the Hierophant, she says quite a lot, obviously. Something I think is very important that we need to look at here. She says down here, there's an undeniable darkness to this card, right? Bottom paragraph on page 28. There's an undeniable darkness to this card, this and all of the fives, and it is not without reason. On a journey from 1 to 9, or 0 to 10, 5 lies exactly in the middle, the farthest you can be from your divine origin and your divine destination. It is the earthly manifestation of spirit. It is the manifestation of zero, capital Z, zero, not as the whole universe, but as a singular point, one individual, separated by layers of flesh and space. She goes on to say you could call it hell, or the pit, or the black tower, or the dark night of your soul. Here you will dive down into the jet black pit of earth, completely separated from God, and face your deepest fears and your shadows. Just like Babylon is the shadow of great empires and churches, men are abominations and women are harlots, so too will you find your darkest self. She goes on to say, after my underlining there, and if successful, you will see it for what it is, embrace it, and love it as part of yourself, and you will become more whole and powerful, and illusions about the earth will begin to melt away. As a child, you learned how to navigate the separateness of an earthly existence, and now you will go down and in and learn to navigate in a connected spiritual existence. So when we look at the fives, and we all know this on some level, right? We're dealing with a certain level of darkness. And we talked, in difficulty and struggle and suffering. We talked a little bit last week, well, extensively, in fact, about the role of what these babies represent, right? They are the harlots and abomination, right? The men are abominations, the women are harlots, etc. And she says it very explicitly, which we just read, that the Hierophant is accepting them and integrating them into her heart, which is why the key is placed there. Similarly, we have Babylon represented here through the tower, and the Hierophant gestures toward their heart. Okay. So we're looking at how can we integrate, and we have these two snakes, which are theoretically the two babies, integrated into the very being of this Hierophant, right? We can't tell where the snakes begin or end and where the Hierophant begins or ends because they are integrated. All right? And their acceptance, etc., is shown here by the way this Hierophant functions. They're just very different. They're different aspects and different ways of embodying this. Okay, so when we come to the fives in this deck, we're looking at different aspects of self, and we're looking at different aspects of struggle with self. Ta-da! There we go. We can all go home, right? That's not really what you're here for, though. She is taking this fire in the forest and moving it into this lion, right? She says at the bottom of 96, the fire from the Four of Wands now has a face. Okay, so, you know, it's a lion, a will, a life of its own, individuality. It has direction, force, and determination. She then connects it directly to the 6. We always have to have this sort of before and after cards here, right? Let me just read that little chunk again. It is the tip of the spear wielded by Archangel Michael to fight the dragons in the 6 of Wands. This is your purpose, direction, will, and life. Okay, so 5 is your purpose, direction, and will and life. Okay, so it's ultimately about finding strength when in the face of opposition. Okay, that's the term I've given it. Because what happens when you decide, when you decide to take that will, take that shining part of who you are, right? That shining aspect that makes you unique, that makes you who you are, what you are, and you choose to express that through a physical body, okay, through a physical self. We just read the part from the Hierophant where she says, you know, 5 is the furthest away from God, right? Whether you're counting 1 to 9 or 0 to 10, you're still, the 5 is still going to be the furthest away, and it's at 0 point where spirit and flesh are coming together as one thing. So as many of you know, probably through a very hard experience, the minute you attempt to bring profound authenticity of that part of your identity into existence, you are going to be met with a certain amount of opposition. Why? Well, because, you know, we tend to be very separate. We tend to be very, very separate from that aspect of ourselves. We tend not to want to integrate things that are scary to us in some way, right? That get in the way of our narrative. We all have a narrative about who and what we believe we are. And when there's information that comes up that, whether it's good or bad, that comes up that contradicts that, it creates conflict. You know, this lion is lit. It is made of fire. It is a lion in the forest. And she talks very specifically, lion who has experience and through perseverance, wisdom and hardship has been tempered and grown a great and courageous heart. Let's just say simply, you know, if you think about the lion, you think about the heart, right? The sign of Leo rules the heart space and the chest. Where do we find there? We find strength, we find courage. I love the French term bon courage, right? When you're getting like good luck. It's not actually luck. It's saying good courage, have courage, you know, be with courage, move with, so coming from the heart, come from your heart. I'm going to link a video that if you have not already seen it, you may find to be utterly helpful when, you know, looking at this. But when we're talking about the 5s, and we're talking specifically about these Hierophants, okay, in either form, we're talking about the integration of shadow. We're talking about it in a very Jungian sense here, okay? So We're talking about the aspects of ourselves that are uncomfortable to us, either because they're bad and hard and difficult to accept, right? Harlots and abominations, or because they come from light and they hold the very essence and truth of the goodness of and the purity of who we are. And we think we become so caught up in this stuff because the brain, we know now, has a negative bias, right? It tends to look at negative information more readily, steadily, happily, etc., than it does positive information. This is science, we know this. But we tend then to not want to see the good that's there either. Because if we aren't shamed out of seeing good, and a lot of us are, we're terrified that it might mean that our ego inflates to a point that it's not, I don't know, that we become jerks, right? That's not usually what happens. Suffice it to say, when we look at, and here, of course, both are integrated. Okay, we've got both the good and bad, etc. All of it has been integrated into this Hierophant. Suffice it to say, when we come to this Five of Wands, we're dealing with the conflict of taking that amazing bright spark, which, which Marie White calls a broken off piece of the sun, right? How beautiful is that? A broken off piece of the sun. It's amazing, right? This is something that will serve us or burn us alive. And in order to know which it will be, we have to take it into this forest, right? This is what we brought back down. We sent in the fours, we sent the Kundalini up the spine, and we're bringing it back down so that we can ground and transform, right? When we come into the five, that's the work of actually transforming. And it means going through a dark forest and holding that sun within ourselves. Yeah. It's big stuff. And I will say that this is a card that can come up around very mundane struggle. Just everyday conflict. I got pulled over by a cop for speeding. And I wondered, as I was waiting for the cop to get there, I had my license out, I had it all together. I thought, ooh, I wonder what tarot card represents being pulled over by a cop for speeding. So I did a quick shuffle while I was waiting. He had all my stuff, and this was the one that came out. I just thought that's really funny. Because there was opposition. I was having a lot of strength in opposition. I was coming back to curiosity, just come back to the moment. I wonder what this is. What does this mean? What does this come from? How is it? And in a very mundane sense, that was what it was, right? My inner fire, my piece of the sun was like, I need to get where I'm going. I have a purpose. I'm on purpose. I'm doing my thing. And, the forest of trees, which apparently had some cops waiting for speeding people, came by and were like, nope, we're not doing that right now. You're going to have to take a deep breath, pause your journey, and dig deep for a moment, calm your nervous system so that you don't, get irritated and pissed off and freaked out. And you just gotta, sit with this for a minute while we look up all your details and, find out if you have any prior convictions and all of that, right? So, yeah. So there's the Five of Wands, everybody. That was really long. Okay, so that's the Five of Wands. Let's look at the Five of Swords. We have so many things going on here, but we have these beautiful white, snowy owls, which are just stunning. And this baby, and, the sign of Vav over her heart. This is Athena. So what we're looking at here is the kind of tenderness that comes from heart-based wisdom. She never actually deals with the baby in this particular card. It's just not something she brings up. She talks at length about suffering and owls and Athena, and talking about how reason and balance are frequently what brings us out of a place of suffering and conflict. And we think of swords, we can think of conflict, right? It's interesting to me that the reason or the sign of reason is over her heart space. So in the Yod He Vav He, let's see if I've got a picture. Yep. Here from the Tetragrammaton spread, that is the character. It's the V in Hebrew, which represents air. In Buddhist philosophy, we would say that this is compassionate wisdom. That compassionate wisdom, this one rings true for me because compassionate wisdom is what resolves conflict. The heart alone will not resolve conflict. It just won't. If you were to stay purely with the heart, and we're not designed to do that really. Frequently we're designed to just fly up into the mind without including the heart. But when we only include the heart, it is very hard to discern things. If you've ever spent a huge period of time working extensively with a self-compassion practice or with like a loving kindness practice, or over time, it can become very, very difficult to discern things in a space where there's a lot of conflict and a need to engage the mind. I really only thankfully occupied that space for a very, very short period of time where I really I could see the conflict, I could see what it was, I could feel deeply in my heart, total compassion, total forgiveness, total pain, total suffering, all simultaneously, and I could never have told you what I needed to do to help resolve that conflict. Over time, with that practice, what began to happen was that not knowing what to do thing abated somewhat in order that I could also engage the mind. So I could see the conflict very clearly, and I could engage my mind alongside my heart space. And actually that activated heart space made the mind clearer. It offered tremendous, tremendous mental clarity to have an open heart. And I feel like that is what is being asked of us here. You know, these owls are looking deeply. She is looking deeply. They're the same colored eyes. I don't know how visible that is. But their wings gesture to the heart. She is seeking outside support. She is not being expected to do this alone. We see another hand here that she's holding. And I think she's holding this child to represent not only vulnerability that comes with conflict, but the importance of understanding the intergenerational aspects of conflict and conflict resolution and why it is so utterly necessary. That if we can resolve it in ourselves, it is something we can pass down to our children. Right? Where we have found that through epigenetics, that trauma can be passed down. Within trauma, and generational trauma, there is often unresolved conflict, whether it's about identity or familial identity or racial identity or religious, whatever identity it is, national identity, where there's conflict. If a person can resolve it in themselves, it has an impact on their child. Likewise, when they don't resolve it for themselves, there is also an impact on their child. So in resolving trauma, you literally not only help yourself, you literally may be saving the life and improving the life of others. especially of your own kids. Specifically, if we want to talk about intergenerational stuff, what Marie White says on page 98, second paragraph here, the fire in the forest, this fire in the forest, lion in the forest, is a fire in the temple, broken off piece of the sun, a burning, blazing, consuming, and hungry source of life and energy, ancient and unfaltering. We tend to it, keep it, and pass it to our children. It is strong and old. It always perseveres and never gives up, nor is it ever tamed. So she doesn't pass anything on to her children in the Five of Wands, but I feel like she does here. She doesn't ever address it directly. Again, this is intuitive, but I feel like we're getting that same sense in this Five of Swords. Yeah. So there we go, Four of Swords. So where things are in the four, either resting or it's the calm before the storm, by the time we get to the five, and this is all external conditions, and or the condition of the mind, the conflict arises when we get to the five. And the way through that conflict is compassionate wisdom, which means it has to be centered and through the heart. So we resolve conflict for ourselves and for others. All right, which is not always an easy thing to do. It's very hard. It means taking responsibility, right? So it's not finding blame, by the way. It's not finding the person to hold responsible. This is all of these fives are about holding ourselves. I hope I don't have to say this. I don't think I do, but just in case. Because anyone who's on a deep spiritual path, like as a guru or, Buddhist teachers and leaders and so on, I think any of them will tell you one of the very hardest things to stop doing on the spiritual path is judging and blaming. Judgment and blame, two of the absolute most difficult things to eradicate, patterns in the ego patterns to eradicate. Most of us will be working with those two particular patterns throughout our entire lives, right? So the Five of Swords is saying dig deeper, go in deeper, deeper. Because you're not going in alone. Ever. You have your guides. You have ancestors and future generations all there with you as you engage. All right. Then we get to the Five of Cups. Yay! I know this is so much. Okay, so we get to the Five of Cups. Yay, a unicorn! This unicorn is, according to Marie White, in the Garden of Eden. Okay, and that Five of Cups really kind of puts us on, it starts us on page 99 in the guidebook to page 100. So she says, this pure white horse is the symbol of compassion, purity, and self-sacrifice. And she is calling this card, the first thing she says is the guarded heart. Okay. She compares this unicorn to a number of different beings and calls it a horse at various points and then calls it a unicorn and so on. One thing she says about it is that, horses are often associated with water. And so she talks about, let's see, it's at the bottom of page 100. She talks about how the horse is this beautiful shell coming up out of the water and guarding your heart in this card. Okay, guarding the well of the heart. Personally, I feel that when we're looking at this Five of Cups, right, this is, to me, a heart that is bleeding, that is so wide open, so broken, running forth with emotion, that the only thing we can do is to find a way to protect it. Because when the heart is like this, it's usually because there are core wounds that are coming up. When we talk about core wounds of the heart, I'm trying to remember the name. I think it's Dr. Mario Martinez. Yeah, Dr. Mario Martinez talks about the core wounds of the heart, and they're usually related to things like shame, guilt, and the fear of abandonment. And if you look at the things in your life that you're really most upset about, that really shake you right to the core of your heart, if you're to think, is this about guilt? Is this about shame? Or in some way, am I afraid that I'm about to be abandoned? If the answer comes down to yes, you're in the range, you're in the realm of the Five of Cups. Okay? Those wounds around guilt, shame, and abandonment are, some of the worst we ever face, right? Some of the absolute worst we ever face. It brings up all of our shit. Like I said, these fives, they're about the conflict. They're about, how do I live in this body at a moment when I feel like the concept of God and spirit is so far away. So far away from me. It's really difficult. It's painful. This is sort of softened for me because of this unicorn. The unicorn here is representing Chiron, and this is hard to see. I really had to dig for it. I don't know if this is going to come across. It's right here in the center of your unicorn. So if you can't see it here, maybe you'll be able to see it in your deck at home. It is the key of Chiron over that unicorn's heart. So she says, guardian of the well is a pure white unicorn with the 8 legs and Chiron's key over his heart, over the mouth of the well. This particular being is guarding your heart. It is offering you the possibility as a wounded individual to heal yourself. And it's actually charging us as wounded beings to heal ourselves. And I feel, even though she doesn't say this explicitly, that is what we're drawing out of the Four of Cups in this deck. She talks about how I think I said this earlier, the Four of Cups, that shell at the bottom of the picture becomes the horse in this picture. So if that is in fact the case, what we draw from the maelstrom here in the Four of Cups is the ability, the healing ability to heal the core wounds of our own hearts. Okay. Whew, there's so much in here. All right, and then we get to the Five of Discs. You know, by the time we get to this Four of Discs, it's so beautiful, right? It's so perfect. We see the star up here. We have hope. We have structure. We're moving forward with things. And we find that everything in nature, everything around us is so beautiful. So extraordinary. How could we want for anything else? This gorgeous monastery, I think she calls this a monastery up on the hill. But I don't think she calls it that in the book. The Four of Discs is an eternal paradise, all of the bounty and abundance and beauty of the earth. There is a monastery there, and the soul can be fed with just the perfection and beauty of the earth. The Five of Discs, on the other hand, she says, is internal. It is paradise, heaven that we can find within ourselves. And I know that the snakes of the hair in this card and the Ouroboros here at the heart are intended to represent flesh. Here too, remember we've seen this little guy before. We've got this teensy little snake, little black snake, and it's this time on his wrist. We've seen it in the Ace of Cups. We've seen it in the Three of Wands. Let's see, I happen to have those right here. I feel like we've seen it other places as well, but, you know, here's our little guy. And, you know, we can see the shape of it and its curling tail. And we see that here too on his wrist. This is my card for the month of February. So I've been working with this card extensively this month, whether I wanted to or not. This one might, you know, where I'm needing perpetually to look deep inside. Like, I'm not going to find what I'm looking for outside. I'm going to have to go inside. And the irony is that I've also been working with runes, and I've been working with specifically finding runes in the landscape on my walks every day with my dog. The irony is that as I look out more and look at what's on my path, right, as I go, I find runes, and where do they send me? Right there. So I may be seeing something external that's a prompt for going back in more deeply. We are expelled from the Garden of Eden, but there, deep in the heart, we still have the Garden of Eden, where we are not subject to the rules of the physical world, where we still live in a state of no shame or suffering or pain or death. There's only life and love and abundance and paradise. Man is the guardian of his own paradise. So what you are looking for with being born, searching, questioning, is for knowledge. Knowledge of the self, knowledge of purpose, and hereafter going down into the deepest pits of hell in the fives, you know that heaven is not in the sky, it is in the breast. Eternity is not somewhere else, it is now, in the present moment. So this card is perpetually calling us back to the heart, back to the internal world. And through the wisdom, right, we've gained so much wisdom in this journey. So in this journey of the fives, right, we've started with the kind of conflict that arises when we take the shadow, right, the depths that she keeps referring to, the pits of hell, the abyss, however we want to phrase it. When we go into that space, we go into the abyss or the shadow, what we retrieve is not just the darkness in order to integrate the things about ourselves that we don't like. What we also find there is the truth of who we are. You know, that God is not outside of us. God is not only outside of us. God is also 100% within us. And that when we take a look at that individual spark, right, that when it meets with material reality and gives rise to an individual or the sense of an individual, the conflict we have is between following that path, the path of truth, of authenticity, of following that divine spark within ourselves, and recognizing that as we do so, it will ultimately, in one form or another, whether it's mundane or profound, it's going to bring us into conflict with the world around us. And that conflict is going to immediately turn the lights off. It will stop us from being able to see this light. It will totally take us away from wanting to accept it because we don't like conflict. Conflict sucks. It's exhausting. It's tiring. Who wants it, right? And yet... right? And yet, as we move forward into the five, that is our task. The task is to say, well, shit. You know, here I am in this body, and I've recognized in the first part of this that accepting the light of who I am, the direction of my soul, it is going to require me to engage in more rational ways of approaching conflict, but that in order to do that, I'm going to have to find my way back into my own heart. Because this doesn't just affect me. My clarity of vision tells me that I will also need to do this on behalf of myself and future generations and the people I love right now. And while it may feel like I'm utterly alone and there is no light here in this place, I am not alone. I have my guides. I have my own inner wisdom. I have my ancestors, future, past, and present. And I have my friends, family, and loved ones, whether they can actually participate in it actively or not. They're there. Right? As we do that, as we recognize that conflict, as it takes us more deeply into the heart, it will then show us what are the wounds that we've got to heal. And then simultaneously remind us that as a wounded healer, we already have all we need to heal those core wounds. Those patterns, those pains, all of them are available to us because we have that as part of who we are. This is where we end up. And as we heal our own heart and ground more presently through the entire body, through the flesh of our existence, what we will find is less of a wounded place inside. The world around us may appear to be a lot more wounded than we are, in fact, which gives us a place for refuge. Paradise is not going to be found in the outside world. When it is, it's temporary. We can find it there for a little while. But we're ultimately going to be asked to come back time and again to the paradise, to the beauty, to the spaciousness of our own heart. So I was told this by Tara Brach about the Garden of Eden. She tells a story sometimes by a particular Dharma teacher who is also a Jewish rabbi. That, in the Garden of Eden happened, or the saddest part of what happened in the Garden of Eden between Adam and Eve was not that they were tempted. It's not that they plucked a fruit from the tree of knowledge and ate from it. None of that. The saddest thing about the Garden of Eden is that Eve and Adam chose to cover themselves in shame rather than to trust that God was big enough to be able to take all of what they had done and hold space around it and forgiveness around it and love around it. So that instead of being healed and forgiven instantly, because of that trust and that ability to trust, what instead happens is this whole drama that unfolds. Where there is shame, there is core wounding of the heart space that is very deep, that asks to be covered, as we see, right? Yeah, I once told that to a friend of mine who was a Christian yoga teacher, and she absolutely loved it. And then our friendship became kind of weird after that. And I said to my partner, Tom, I don't know why that made such a weird thing, because for me, that was utterly liberating. And what he said to me was, yes, but you've just challenged the entire foundations of her faith. And yet, that the ability, if we can hold space for ourselves to heal the shame, to heal the guilt, to heal the abandonment, whether we do it through believing in God, or whether we do it through belief in our own Buddha nature, or belief in the possibility that integration of the shadow in all forms is utterly possible. We have the ability to do it. It is possible to do. And that is ultimately the lesson of the fives, as we see it. Again, leave all of your comments, thoughts, questions, etc. in the comments, and I will do my utmost to get to those a little more quickly. And yeah, I will see you in the next one. Take care. Bye.